Here's what's coming up on The World Today. King Charles makes first visit to Wales as monarch. Hundreds of graves found in liberated city of Izium in Ukraine. Plus, flash floods kill at least 10 overnight in Italy. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. King Charles III and Camilla, the Queen Consort, are in Wales on the final stop of their tour of the UK's four nations. In a speech alternating between English and Welsh in Parliament, he promised to follow the selfless example of the Queen. Meanwhile, it's been confirmed that at the King's request, both Princes William and Harry will be in uniform when they take part in a vigil beside the Queen's coffin on Saturday evening. The King and his siblings will hold a similar vigil at the Queen's Lying-in State this evening. But in the meantime, let's take a look at the King's visit to Wales.
A 21-gun salute marked the arrival of King Charles and his wife Camilla, the Queen Consort, to Cardiff. The royal couple's trip to the Welsh capital marks the end of a tour of the United Kingdom where King Charles has performed ceremonial duties to acknowledge his status as the new monarch and head of state, and to greet the public mourning the loss of Queen Elizabeth, who reigned for 70 years and died last Thursday at the age of 96. In a tribute to the Queen, a national service of prayer and reflection was held at Llandaff Cathedral.
Wisdom as he faces the challenges of sovereignty, and grace to accept the mantle of his calling.
Shortly after, the King and the Queen Consort travelled to the Welsh Parliament to receive a motion of condolence.
We welcome your Majesties to our Senedd today, and we offer our sincerest condolences on the sad death of your mother, the Queen. We know that so many of the people we represent have been saddened, some shaken by her loss, and they hold you and your family in their hearts and prayers at this time.
While there, the King reflected on his mother's love for Wales, responding in Welsh and English to condolences.
I am deeply grateful for the addresses of condolence, which so movingly paid tribute to our late sovereign, my beloved mother, the Queen.
He also said it was an honour to be Prince of Wales, and that his son William, who takes on the title, has a deep love for the nation.
I take up my new duties with immense gratitude for the privilege of having been able to serve as Prince of Wales. That ancient title, dating from the time of those great Welsh rulers like Llywelyn ap Griffith, whose memory is still rightly honoured, I now pass to my son William, whose love for this corner of the earth is made all the greater by the years he himself has spent here.
Wales has a particular significance for the new king, who for 5 decades preceding last week's accession had the title Prince of Wales. He is the longest holder of the title in history.
Thank you, Your Majesty, for your words to the Senedd and to Wales.
Meanwhile, the UK government says the queue to see the Queen Lying-in State at London's Westminster Hall is at capacity and has been paused for new joiners. Already tens of thousands of people from all walks of life from Britain and around the world have patiently queued for hours for the opportunity to pass by the coffin, with the line stretching back almost 5 miles. Officials expect about 750,000 people to view the coffin before the Lying-in State ends at 6:30 a.m. on Monday, the day of Queen Elizabeth's state funeral. Despite the new development, mourners are undeterred.
It was breathtaking. It was very emotional. And I can't express my feeling. Basically, it was very, very emotional. We really wanted to come because we were really fond of her. She's been such a wonderful person all the way through, and we really wanted to see her.
She was my commander-in-chief. For some, it hits hard. For others, it hits really hard. So, yes, we all knew it was coming. We knew her age. We knew she was stepping back. But still, that was not news I was ready for, emotionally or physically able to accept easily.
Inside, it's just, I just can't, there's no words to describe it. You know, she's regal throughout her life, regal in her death.
Quite a traumatic event for the whole nation and the world, I think. So, but actually being in the hall with her presence was something you can't explain until you're actually in there. So it's just, I'm glad that we spent 10 hours queuing up to get in there.
Everything was silent and she was just there, and the guards were all there, and it was pretty nice and beautiful.
And London's police force have said the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth will be the biggest security operation it has ever undertaken as prime ministers, presidents and royals from around the world come together on Monday. The Queen's funeral is expected to attract hundreds of thousands of people to London's streets, echoing other important events in Britain's history. Stuart Cundy, London's Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner, says his force will be deploying the largest number of officers on the city's streets and the largest protection operation for world leaders and monarchs.
So this is the single largest protection operation that the Met Police has ever undertaken. We will have hundreds of world leaders and other senior figures here in London on Monday. We are well versed with working with and engaging with leaders and their support teams from across the world, and that's what we will be doing next week to ensure this is a safe and a secure environment so people can remember the Queen, both at the state funeral and as the Queen leaves London and heads to Windsor. Her Majesty the Queen is our longest serving monarch. I think what we have seen this week, not just with the ceremonial events, but the lying in state and the tens of thousands of members of the public that are coming to pay their respects, I think brings into sharp focus that there is nothing that could probably possibly compare to not just what's gone on already, but what will occur on Monday at the state funeral. So our policing operation is part of a much wider operation to support all of the events that occurred this week, the lying in state and the state funeral on Monday. We work closely with colleagues from the military, from the government and many other organisations. And first and foremost, the priority for us, the Met Police, is to ensure that this is a safe and a secure environment for people to attend the state funeral and for members of the public to pay their respects and remember the Queen.
And already in the United Kingdom is New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who today attended Queen Elizabeth's lying-in state in Westminster Hall. Television footage showed Ardern, who is in London for the Queen's funeral, which will be held on Monday, stopping to curtsy as she filed past the coffin. The coffin stands in the ancient Westminster Hall, draped in the royal standard and with the imperial crown of state placed on top. Well, some mourners have waited up to 11 hours to pay their respects. Many have been in tears and others have saluted or bowed their heads. And also queuing to see the Queen lying in state earlier today was football star David Beckham. The former England captain reportedly queued for more than 13 hours alongside thousands of other mourners. The 47-year-old told reporters he had joined the queue at 12:15 a.m. A Chinese government delegation has been banned from attending the Lebanon state of Queen Elizabeth II, according to parliamentary sources. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is understood to have refused a request for access over Chinese sanctions against 5 MPs and 2 pairs. China says it's still considering whether to attend the Queen's funeral. A high-ranking official from Beijing had been expected to be amongst the guests, but a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said earlier today that no decision had been made. In the meantime, tributes to Queen Elizabeth II continue as the United Nations General Assembly convened a moment of silence for the fallen British sovereign. The moment was led by the President-elect of the General Assembly, Kasaba Kurosi.
The outpour of sympathy. I now invite representatives. It is my sad duty to pay tribute to the memory of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away on 8th of September 2022. On behalf of the General Assembly, I should like to convey our condolences to the government and people of the United Kingdom, to the wider Commonwealth of Nations, and to the bereaved family of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
The sun has set on a most extraordinary reign. We are here today to pay tribute to the memory of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Britain's longest reigning monarch. Queen Elizabeth was a pillar without peer on the world stage for more than 70 years. She acceded to the throne in a different age, the era of Churchill, Truman, Stalin, Mao, and de Gaulle. A reassuring and inspiring presence, she was an anchor of stability across decades of often turbulent history. The first part of a remarkable reign saw many nations gaining independence from Britain and the formation of the Commonwealth, a diverse multilateral group. Commonwealth members are among the most steadfast supporters of the United Nations, and we mourn with them also today. Visiting South Africa to mark its readmittance to the Commonwealth after the fall of apartheid, the Queen spoke of how faith could move mountains and recreate a nation. We join together today in this global assembly to honor her life and legacy. On behalf of the United Nations, I would like to convey my sincere condolences to the Queen's bereaved family, the government and people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the wider Commonwealth. Excellencies, Queen Elizabeth defied geopolitical gravity. She was a consummate diplomat, and she often wielded her diplomatic skills as the only woman in the room. When our institution and Queen Elizabeth were both young, she stood at this very podium and called on leaders to demonstrate their devotion to the ideals of the United Nations Charter. She well understood that formal bonds and agreements are only half the story. International cooperation also depends on our strengths and personal commitment, our dedication as leaders to the principles of peace, justice, and human rights.
Since Her Majesty's death, I've spoken with many colleagues here at the United Nations who have shared their own memories and reflections on her reign. She travelled to over 100 countries, forging bonds and leaving a lasting impact in every country she visited. I had the immense pleasure and privilege of meeting her and working on 2 of her many state visits during my career. She was, quite simply, the United Kingdom's greatest diplomat. Her life dedicated to fostering peace and friendship through the Commonwealth and the world.
I want to thank you for convening this very fitting tribute to the memory of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who was Canada's longest reigning sovereign and head of state. We express our profound condolences to King Charles III and his family. Nous vivons cette perte avec de nombreux autres pays pour qui elle était le chef d'État et la chef du Commonwealth, et nous leur exprimons à tous notre solidarité et notre respect. Son décès, après avoir vécu une vie aussi remarquable et remplie, est une occasion maintenant de prendre le temps de réfléchir et de reconnaître son profond dévouement pour les pays qu'elle a servis avec tant de grâce et de courage.
And over in Zimbabwe, the death of Queen Elizabeth has resurfaced memories both fond and bitter in the country. In Harare, some attended a church service to remember the monarch, while others said they didn't see the point.
Just a handful of mourners attended a memorial service for Queen Elizabeth in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. The death of the British monarch has stirred mixed feelings across Africa about the legacy of colonialism on the continent. At the Anglican Church in Harare, some congregants expressed fond memories for Zimbabwe's former colonial ruler. Queen Elizabeth visited Zimbabwe in 1947 with her parents, and again as queen in 1991, when she was hosted by former President Robert Mugabe. At the time of her first visit, Zimbabwe was a British-ruled colony with some autonomy, known as Southern Rhodesia, and with a white minority government. Outside the church, some Zimbabweans, like Ronward Manzungu, says colonialism is inextricably linked with Queen Elizabeth's 70-year reign.
I do not think it is necessary to celebrate her life. In the past, she led the colonial era. It is painful that they took our land while we were left to suffer. We will never forget. When she died, I was indifferent. She was old, so I guess it was now time.
Langton Musa says he doesn't see the need for a memorial.
I do not see the need to hold memorials for her. As a common Zimbabwean, it does not benefit me in any way.
The Southern African country left the Commonwealth network of mostly former territories of the British Empire in 2003. That was after Mr. Mugabe came under criticism over disputed elections and the seizures of land from white farmers. In 2008, Queen Elizabeth stripped Mr. Mugabe of the honorary knighthood she'd awarded him in 1994, citing the abuse of human rights and disregard for the democratic process.
More tributes now. Princess Haya bint Hussein of Jordan, whose family has enjoyed a long friendship with the British royals, has also paid tribute to Queen Elizabeth as a woman she looked up to for inspiration. 48-year-old Haya, whose high-profile custody battle with the ruler of Dubai, her ex-husband, concluded in London in March, recalled the kindness of the Queen after her mother died in a helicopter crash in 1977 and later when King Hussein died in 1999.
What I feel is just a huge amount of sorrow for the world, which is, I think that we'll never, ever see a queen like that, and we never have before. She was a person who touched everybody's lives around the world, and we were just so honoured to be a part of her journey, really, and she's made the world a much, much better place. I remember after my late father died, my late mother died, she was, Her Majesty was kind enough to have special words for my younger brother and I, and to make sure that we were all right. But she's been, for me, like, as everyone else, a constant thread in nearly every aspect of our lives. I think there was not a decision made or a time when I didn't think what would Her Majesty do or what would Her Majesty say. She exemplified dignity, she exemplified kindness, she exemplified connecting with people. She was, I think, to all walks of society and to so many people around the world, a person that could transcend into their lives and provide an example and an inspiration to look up to. And I did so, like so many others.
And still ahead on The World Today. Three armed men hold up banks demanding access to their savings in 3 separate events in Lebanon. More details in a moment. Thanks for staying with us. Some update on Russia's invasion of Ukraine now. Ukraine says hundreds of graves have been found outside Izium days after it was retaken from Russia. Wooden crosses, most of them marked with numbers, were discovered in a forest outside the city by advancing Ukrainian forces. Authorities have started exhuming some of the graves. It's not yet clear what happened to the victims, but early accounts suggest some may have died from shelling and a lack of access to healthcare. And Western sanctions are starting to hurt Russia's ability to make advanced weaponry for the war in Ukraine. And that's according to a top NATO military advisor. Robert, who chairs NATO's military committee, says both sides in the war are facing challenges because the conventional conflict has required expending military supplies at rates unseen in decades. The United States, the European Union and other countries announced several packages of sanctions against Moscow after its February 24 invasion of Ukraine, which included a ban on the sale of advanced technology.
They are hampered more and more by the sanctions because some of the components that they need for their weapon systems actually came from Western industry. So they are hampered. We now see the first serious signs of that in terms of their ability to produce, for example, the replacement of cruise missiles and more advanced weaponry. As far as we know, they have a lot of, they still have a lot of ammunition. The consumption rates on the Russian side is even much higher than on the Ukrainian side. But there is indications that the Russians are roaming the world market for ammunition at the moment as well in other countries, not being NATO allies, but or supporters of Ukraine. So it might mean that they have an issue with ammunition supplies as well. We see limited numbers of fresh troops coming in. And the one thing that we're sure of is that the training level of those troops is not very high. So, I mean, it's about 85% of the Russian forces are in Ukraine. So they do not have a lot of reserve in their standing army to bring to Ukraine, basically. And in Russia, basically every unit gets its direction from higher authorities, from a higher level. And therefore, if something changes, they are basically reporting back, waiting for a new order. And whilst that was ongoing, the Ukrainians advanced so quickly that the Russians didn't get an answer before they could respond. And then they had to retreat further, and then had to retreat further. So the Ukrainians are basically leaving the Dachau up to the platoon level. That is a group of 30 soldiers with a young lieutenant, and they are basically choosing themselves what the next step is. And that is one of the reasons why they are so successful at the moment, because the Russians are fighting in a very old-fashioned way in that sense.
Eastern Europe.
And U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that the war in Ukraine has to be won and that Russia has to be held accountable. Pelosi made the comments in the German capital of Berlin on the sidelines of the Speakers' Conference, where representatives of the G7's respective Speakers of Parliaments meet. Talking about the war in Ukraine, Pelosi said G7 countries have to persist until the guns are silent. According to U.S. officials, the U.S. will soon announce a new $600 million arms package for Ukraine.
It's an honor to be with you. It's humbling to be with Speaker Stepanchuk. After all, we will go home and bring this message to our parliaments, our Congress. He will go into battle, a country at war. And as you said, Madam President, earlier today, we will persist until the guns are silent. And to that end, it requires substantial security support, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, and sanctions that make sure that Russia feels the pain of this. The war must be won. Russia must be held accountable for the atrocities they are committing against little children, using rape as a weapon of war, hunger as a tool of war, and the rest. But they must be held accountable. And I was encouraging to hear how Ukraine is documenting the crimes against humanity that are taking place there now. We congratulate you on the changes that are happening now, Mr. Speaker, and again, we want that to continue until the guns are silent. We're in it until victory is won by the Ukrainian people.
And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says the country is prepared for a Russian retaliation. And this is after Berlin took control of a major Russian-owned oil refinery. Berlin strives to shore up energy supplies and meet its European Union commitment to eliminate Russian oil imports by the end of the year. And Russian President Vladimir Putin has told Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi that he wants the conflict in Ukraine to end as soon as possible, but that Ukraine is set on achieving its objectives on the battlefield. President Putin says he's aware about India's stance on the conflict and India's concerns. The Russian president met the Indian Prime Minister on the sidelines of the SCO summit in Uzbekistan. Well, as well as meeting Modi, Russian President Putin also met with China's Xi Jinping, and with a focus on energy trade. The DW's Lars Holter is in Berlin to tell us more about that meeting. Lars.
Заявил об отказе от переговорного процесса.
Yes, it absolutely is, because Putin needs to open new markets. He lost the Western countries who have always bought billions worth of natural gas, and that's all gone now due to the war in Ukraine, of course. And now for Russia, the two biggest emerging markets are China and India, of course. Now, let me first tell you about China, maybe, because there was that meeting already yesterday between Russia and China, Putin and Xi Jinping. China is already and has always been Russia's biggest trading partner outside the Western bloc. They've always been contributing about 20% of Russia's trade, but it has recently grown a lot. Since the war started, China's imports from Russia have grown 17% on oil, 39% on electricity, and 50% on natural gas. So that is one big market change here happening. And now when we're looking at India and Narendra Modi's job today when he's meeting with Vladimir Putin is a little more tricky. India is, of course, a major market, and India is probably interested in buying more Russian energy, as it's currently also pretty cheap compared to the world market. But India has to really avoid being too close to Russia and to China, because those two countries, of course, are the West's biggest adversaries. And India, of course, needs its Western ties just as much as its ties to Russia and China. So for Modi, it will really be a tricky balance to keep today.
Europe is in the midst of this energy crisis with rising prices for gas, and that's a problem for business and households alike. For months, governments have been looking for solutions. Now the EU is getting involved with a concept to help all members of the bloc. Lars, what's the EU planning to do to help?
Yes, and it's the right thing, of course, for the European Union to step in here because much of the markets here, energy, electricity, that's all EU regulated anyway. So really everyone has to be on board here in time of crisis. So what are they proposing? What came out this week? Most of all, a much discussed windfall profit tax. Now that is an extra tax on companies that are making hefty profits right now just thanks to high energy prices. Now, here's the details on that. Energy regulation says that all electricity can be sold at a price determined by the producer with the highest cost. That is, of course, meant to put all providers on a level playing field. But what does it really mean? Right now, all utility companies can sell electricity based on the economics of those who produce power using natural gas, because that has become a lot more expensive and it's sold at a higher price. But those companies that are making power using, let's say, solar or wind or even coal, they have not had any higher cost at all. So these companies are making a lot of extra money for reasons that are completely out of their control. And the EU says if they're taxing this with that so-called windfall profit tax, this can bring in 140 billion euros. And that, of course, can be spread around.
Well, who is this measure helping the most? I mean, who is it targeted here?
Well, this money is supposed to go to the member states directly to be doled out as they see fit. But it looks, of course, like much of it is going to households then and to mid-sized companies. Let's look at the households first. With winter approaching, many are worried that they can't heat their homes, and there will be government assistance for that. But then also looking at the companies, many mid-sized companies have been up in arms recently. They said the government has, of course, quickly given out help and support to some of the biggest corporations, for example, in the chemical industry, because they needed to make sure that there would not be too much of an economic disaster coming up. But the governments forgot about the smaller ones, the bakeries, the restaurants, the barber shops, the retailers. Many of those are worried that their cost goes up because, of course, they need energy for baking, cooking, for keeping the lights on. And that they also might lose out on revenue because their customers, generally consumers, might actually cut down on spending.
And who else is left that needs help?
Well, probably a lot of people are still left out. It will take a while for governments to figure out who else might have a problem in time of crisis now, because there are so many different challenges for everybody. There's, for example, different challenges for homeowners over tenants in rental apartments. There's different challenges for seniors and retirees over working class people who are still in jobs. But then, of course, you have the freelancers, the hospitals. So as long as this energy crisis is going on, it seems a lot more action will be needed on the political side, and that might come from the regional governments as well, of course, as from Brussels, from the European Union.
All right, then DW's Lars Halter, thank you so much for the update. And moving on now, away from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, let's have some other stories now. At least 10 people have died after flash floods hit the Italian region of Marche overnight. Torrential rain falling late on Thursday caused rivers and streams to overflow and inundate coastal towns around the regional capital of Ancona. Around 16 inches of rain, half a year's worth, were recorded in just a few hours. Rescuers are still searching for 4 others, including a child who was separated when a river burst its banks. According to local reports, a mother who managed to escape her car with her child in her arms became separated from him after being overwhelmed by water when the river Missa burst its banks. And now 3 Lebanese banks were held up by depositors seeking access to their own money frozen in the banking system today, adding to a spate of hold-ups this week spurred by frustration over a spiraling financial implosion with no end in sight. An armed man entered a branch of Bloom Bank in the Lebanese capital seeking his deposit. The man, identified as Abid Subra, was cheered on by a large crowd of people gathered outside, a scene that has played out at several such incidents. Also this morning, a man with a gun that turned out to be a toy was arrested after holding up a Lebanese bank in the southern city of Gaza. In a third incident, a man armed with a pellet gun entered a branch of LGB Bank in Beirut's Ramlet Al-Baida area, seeking to withdraw some $50,000 in savings. According to reports, Lebanese banks would soon announce a 3-day closure next week over mounting security concerns. The country's banks have locked most depositors out of their savings since an economic crisis took hold 3 years ago, leaving much of the population unable to pay for basics. Eritrea is mobilizing military reservists to bolster the army, which has been aiding neighboring Ethiopia in its fight against rebel forces. Security forces in many areas have been stopping people to check if they are exempt from military conscription. Groups of men were crying as they bid farewell to relatives, according to witnesses. Many in the capital, Asmara, were given notice on Thursday and moved to the border with Ethiopia's Tigray region within hours. Reservists up to the age of 55 have been called up. Eritrea has compulsory decades-long military service, which has been widely criticized by human groups. And still ahead on the program. Mexicans take to the streets to celebrate Independence Day anniversary. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Over in the United States, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has accused Republican governors of using migrants as political pawns. Asked about a decision by Florida governor to fly migrants to Martha's Vineyard, Jean-Pierre said the move was a premeditated political stunt.
We have had a process in place. There's a legal way of doing this. For managing migrants, Republican governors interfering in that process and using migrants as political pawns is shameful, is reckless, and just plain wrong. And also the fact that that Fox News and not the Department of Homeland Security, the city or local NGOs were alerted about a plan to leave migrants, including children, on the side of a busy DC street makes clear that this is just a cruel, premeditated political stunt. This is what they are doing. And a couple more things. The migrants, including children, who arrived in Martha's Vineyard were misled about where they were being taken and what would be provided when they arrived is also deeply alarming. And as we have done many times in response to attempts to create chaos and confusion by Republican governors, we are working to manage the consequences of these two stunts as well. It's a fundamental long-term issue. It is a broken system, but we are also doing the work. And, I have to say the work that what we're seeing Republicans doing, elected officials using migrants as a pawn, is not the way to move forward on this. We were not alerted of this. I thought you were asking me specifically about the VP's residence.
Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now for more on this story. Maria, help us understand this sanctuary state policy and what it means exactly for migrants and the United States. Maria, it seems we do not have your audio. If you could unmute so we can carry on with the discussion. I hope we can hear you now.
Yes, you can hear me?
Perfect, yes.
Yes, it has been clear that the White House is not happy with what we're seeing in this situation. The White House has obviously been very clear as to what their thoughts are as it relates to migrants coming into the United States. We know that immigration policies have been on a standstill, even with the Biden administration. But when you talk about, if for those who are familiar with Washington, and when you think about where the vice president lives, as the press secretary stated, it's an extremely busy street. It's one of the busiest streets in Washington. There is no area to even leave anyone on the side of the road in that observatory circle. And so when you look at that, it does lean to the fact that we are dealing with potentially a political piece. And when you think about Martha's Vineyard, that is a vacation location. That is not an area where there's plentiful jobs. It's not an area where there's any even social services offered for individuals as well.
The White House, as we heard, has accused Republicans of using migrants as political pawns. I'm interested to hear how ordinary Americans are receiving this news.
I think ordinary Americans are looking at this as another piece, a part of what we're preparing for with these midterm elections. We just had a few elections here, primary elections just a few days ago, last Tuesday, that obviously got a lot more attention than typical, because we are preparing for a political season that is going to be probably one of the most historic midterm elections that we've seen in recent history, especially as you look at what many consider two Republican parties. That of what the president has even mentioned as the MAGA sector of the Republican Party, and those traditional Republicans. And so when we look at that and we really understand what is actually happening, we see that politics are at a heightened level at this time. And really it's all about what is going to be next as far as the leadership and the direction of the United States moving forward.
And speaking of the plan, how is the Biden administration planning to manage this surge that we've been seeing? I mean, it's not just now. We've been seeing this surge of migrants coming into the United States for some time now.
The Biden administration has put some plans in place, but whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they have been deeply criticized for a lack of ability to really control what they consider those borders, and also being able to put programs in place to quickly move people through. So you have many Democrats who are in support of immigration reform bills and really want us to be able to have more open doors, and are very upset about the fact that it's a long process of being able to get through. Oftentimes people takes 2 years for them to even get an appointment. And so when you see that type of stalling with the ability to process immigration, that is a major concern. And then for many others who are more on the conservative end, are very upset that we're even letting anyone in the doors, that we're not having a stronger push toward increasing the wall and making more efforts to send people back home, and not allowing dreamers and individuals to be able to be in the U.S. even if it is illegally. And so that, I think, is where we're sitting, and the president really has a lot of work to do, especially as we look at the midterm elections, and that is going to be a major piece, a major discussion point when we get to November.
All right, then, Maria, thank you so much for the update, and do have a lovely weekend. And now thousands of Mexicans have joined President Andrés Manuel López Obrador with chants of Viva Mexico to mark the anniversary of the country's independence movement from Spain over 210 years ago. López Obrador presided over the Cry of Independence event from the balcony of the National Palace in the center of Mexico City. Mexico's Independence Day commemorates the call to arms by rebel priest Miguel Hidalgo on September 16, 1810, at the start of the country's war of independence from Spain. Viva Mexico is a current-day twist on rebel priest Hidalgo's original call to arms against the Spanish more than 210 years ago. Mexicans eventually achieved their independence from Spain in 1821. And now 28-year-old Senegalese star Boubou Niang, popular as the social media sensation Boubou Design, is extending the reach of its paintbrushes to the Middle East with a number of artworks created in tribute to the United Arab Emirates. The contemporary African artist left his 2.9 million fans on Instagram for a live experience with an exclusive audience in the city of Dubai. Our correspondent, Maiwa Adegoke, now reports.
Dubai-based violinist Marianne creates a melodious tune as viral Instagram sensation Boubou works his magic at his second ever live painting event in Dubai. With some paint, a palette, and a bunch of roses, the Senegalese artist gets to work as a room full of African businessmen, Emirati royalty, and others anticipate the finished work. In no time, he flips the palette upside down in his usual style to reveal the artwork, to the delight of the gathering. The event, put together by organizers of the biggest African festival in the region, gives residents of Dubai an opportunity to experience his talent up close.
Boubou is one of the artists that I really enjoy watching because he's doing a live painting. And for me, this is not just looking at the painting, it's seeing it being alive. So I'm really excited. I was really honored to be there when he was doing this first one in Dubai, and I'm extremely honored that he's part of this All Africa Festival.
I think I saw him for the first time last year at the All Africa Festival, and experiencing it in a more intimate setting, even more surreal. And I had the opportunity to speak to him, and he's so humble, so sweet, and just seeing him kind of doing what he does, and the results in the end, it's like a journey. So I've been loving it.
The private gathering in his honor also marks his official introduction to Emirati royalty ahead of the 2022 edition of the All Africa Festival.
Well, this festival, it's a great honor for Boubou to be invited over here and to meet the African diaspora. As Boubou in his spirit is people used to call Africa is for tomorrow, for Boubou, Africa is today. It's happening right now, and it's happening in Dubai. And we're on board, 100%.
So what's going to happen to this painting now?
Well, as Boo said, they're open for offers. So I guess people can make offers for them, and then we see what happens.
Part of the proceeds from the sale of the painting will be donated to the All Africa Festival in Dubai. From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Maya Wadegoke for Channels Television.
Definitely extraordinary talents, really, really amazing. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. You have a lovely weekend.